growth engine in Colorado. So we're excited to kind of speak to a number of folks here on the panel and certainly provide a discussion. But first, I want to introduce those folks on the panel. So I can introduce myself first since I'm talking. My name is Lauren Kiedrowski. I'm going to moderate the conversation between the four folks who I'm excited to introduce you to. Little on my background there, but started my career at Accenture, kind of moved into a number of sales roles at Paychex, Jive Software, Rally, Kapost, a number of Boulder-based startups, and now I'm at Google doing executive recruiting. Want to introduce Anna there on the left. Anna Steele has held roles on the sales, account management, product, and strategy side of the business for Rally, Kapost, Waffle.io, Broadcom company, and now Workday. Next, Tom Chakur. Tom started his career at JD Edwards and Oracle before moving into the startup world, where he founded FilterBox, Techstars class of 07, which was acquired by Jive. Tom has gone on to create both the Techstars Rising Stars and Startups Illustrated programs on a mission to create opportunities for underrepresented entrepreneurs in the innovation economy. Tom is currently a member of the founding team and CTO at Gravity House. Next, Greg Keller. Greg started on the product side at IBM and Embarcadero Technologies before moving into the world of startups, founding mobile video company Blip Snips, Techstars class of 2010, and operating other venture-backed companies before helping to found and launch Colorado-based identity and access management company JumpCloud, who just raised $160 million at a $2.6 billion valuation. And last, Patrick Cameron. Patrick started his career on the consulting side at Accenture before getting bit by the startup bug. He has since had go-to-market leadership roles at Akamai, FilterBox, Jive Software, Kapost, and JumpCloud, and currently he is the CRO at PlayerLink. So I'll just jump right in. Let's talk first, team, here about defining a world-class organization. I think that's a proper place to start, really understanding what it means to each of you. So Patrick, I'll start with you. You've built revenue organizations on both coasts, as well as here in Colorado. What organizational characteristics, in your opinion, drive a world-class organization, and how does the environment in Colorado facilitate that?
I think when I think about world-class organizations, I think about the stuff that's kind of not so sexy to start, repeatable, scalable process. How do you do something over and over again? And make sure that you're getting the result you expect. When I think about it from a people perspective, though, I think that's where it gets more exciting. In my mind, that's really about providing financial opportunity and career progression, and really finding those opportunities to build a path for people to kind of grow their careers and grow themselves as people. And then, I think when you're thinking about that, and especially in the context of a revenue organization, it's really about accountability to the number and accountability to driving success. And then it's also about transparency. Like, what are you doing in the organization broadly? Like, what are the problems you're trying to solve? And then how are you doing that specifically? Now, when I think about Colorado specifically, I really think about, when I first moved here, I was working on the East Coast for Akamai, and I quit, as my in-laws like to say, a perfectly good job. And got to Colorado thinking I'd just grab another tech job. And I was like, whoa, where are the tech jobs? And so what I realized is there were a ton of people here who loved being here and were willing to be creative and figure it out. So I think that creativity is something that is unique to Colorado, that willingness to stick it out in a geography and figure out a way to make things happen. I think there's a little bit of a prove it mentality. And by that, I mean, we're in what my friends on the East Coast call the flyover states, right? And so can you build something big and meaningful here? And so I think there's a little bit of a chip on people's shoulder who are doing that here, because, you're not always the first place people look. And then I think the last piece is really balance. I've seen people in organizations be much more balanced here, where people like to be outside and do things that help clear their head and get them space from work, where that's not always the case other places. And I think that leads to a workforce that's more focused and fresher, but also that is, taking on the hard problems and being creative in how they solve them.
Great. I love that chip on their shoulder. Anna, maybe I'll go to you. Rally was at the forefront of driving the agile software development transformation. I had the good fortune to spend a little bit of time there, but I know you were there significantly longer. In your opinion, kind of what were the keys to the success at Rally? And also kind of where did you drive incredible market impact?
Yeah, so Rally was such an interesting ride, I think, especially in the Colorado startup space. And as I thought about all the different things that made Rally really unique and really impactful in the market, there's actually this really kind of special sauce moment for me that I wanted to talk about today, which was how in organizations, especially when we're all doing the work and getting busy in startups, we sometimes get stuck in the silos in our disciplines, in our areas, myopically focused on, in some cases, driving the number or what's the right decision for the product this day in this moment. And at Rally, they did something really interesting. So there was a moment where our founder, Ryan Martins at Rally, founded a large group of people called the Office of the CTO around him. And their remit was one of the most interesting I've ever seen in a startup, which was to take their extreme experience and knowledge in different areas and go cross-functionally across the organization. So for me, that was a game changer for how Rally functioned, because as you got people who are super focused and dedicated to a specific area of the business, you had this ongoing powerhouse of mind share happening through the office of the CTO, where they would take really hard structural problems about communication, about how to plan, how to take that stuff all the way to go-to-market actions, and they would kind of deploy into the rest of the organization and cross-cut a bunch of the different functional areas. And so to me, thinking about kind of how did Rally become so impactful so quickly, it was really them paying attention to where the hard problems happen can't be fixed just in one area, just in one department, but putting money and time and effort into kind of fixing things holistically across the entire company for Rally.
That's great. I love that cross-functional example, hugely powerful. Greg, maybe to you or Tom, if Tom joined, and I'm not sure if he was able to join, but what other kind of organizational characteristics or Colorado advantages haven't been mentioned that should be when we think about building a world-class organization?
I'm not sure if Tom is here, so I'll dip in. My experience here building companies the last 15 years in Colorado, there is a definite character here in our region that builds connections. It's a really unique thing. I think having been party to building companies on the West Coast in San Francisco and then working in various companies on the East Coast. Yes, I am that old, so I've seen a lot of different patterns. I think there is something about the typical Coloradan who really enjoy their working relationships with their partners more than I've seen at any other organization. You see a lot of talent bouncing on the coasts, which is really a unique phenomenon. I'm not sure if it's chasing the dollar or the sexier opportunity. You tend to get a lot more commitment here and a lot more understanding of the balance of lifestyle and hard work, which is seemingly like this mythical phrase, work hard, play hard. We live it, and it's been remarkable to watch, especially the teams that I've been proud to sort of pull together and form companies out of.
That's great. I think that's a really good segue to the next topic. I was kind of hearing this theme, both I think when we prepared as a group, but certainly in your answers just now, that top talent wins. So I'd love to dig in further on kind of your talent strategy. Greg, actually, if I can go back to you, would love to talk to you a little about JumpCloud. I think they've seen incredible growth over the past several years. I've watched that from the outside, but how have you won at the talent game? And would love to hear what, if anything, changed during COVID as well.
We're constant. There is no one. You're constantly evolving. And I think the most critical thing for JumpCloud and companies like ours, who sort of in growth stage, is never forget your foundational roots. Let me sort of just couch it this way. building the team that we did, let's call it 2014, we launched service in September of 2014. So roughly we're going on 8 years. And at the time, we were doing what many would have referred to as a fool's errand, actually staring Microsoft directly in the eyes, taking on their crown jewel in the identity space. And, I think if I could just say this out loud, I'd been on more calls during the period of raising early capital where people thought we were, smoking Colorado marijuana and we would never win. Guess what? When you go back to my prior, sort of statement of you build these teams with committed people who want to build connections with each other, and you're indestructible as far as I'm concerned. So we built the foundation on these core people who are passionate about reinventing in our space. There's plenty of other market sectors where entrepreneurs are reinventing their own respective spaces. But we found the glue, the thread, the seam of people who didn't blink in those early days. Fast forward, prior to COVID, we're, a few hundred employees, generally in one state, in Colorado. COVID hit. And like everybody here on this call in their respective home offices, we had to change our thesis of hiring. We went talent sniping. So we went from, call it 195, 200 employees to roughly now 460, 470 employees in 36 states, in 6 countries. So based upon us having incorporated here, built our DNA here, established the product market fit here, we provided a foundation of talent hunting and legitimized our approach at sort of disrupting this market. And now let people work wherever they want to work. We are through the looking glass, people. We are not going back to old times in brick and mortar offices. Certainly we will in certain areas, but generally speaking, we have to find where the great humans are and make them part of your mission. And that's what we did.
That's great. I love to hear that. I think even big companies like Google are struggling with that strategy right now. And do we go back to an office? Do we not? Is it a hybrid environment? How do we find the best talent and let them work where they want to work? So appreciate that perspective, and probably an advantage that your team's been able to do that as well. Tom, I think you joined, and I know you just jumped in, but we're talking about how top talent wins and kind of our talent strategy. And I had a question for you. So if I could loop you into the conversation, as the founder of the Rising Stars program, I understand you worked to attract underrepresented groups into the entrepreneurial ecosystem in partnership with Techstars. So I wanted to hear from you in terms of what did you learn building that program that might be useful for our listeners, with regards to talent strategy.
Hey, Tom, I think you're on mute.
Oh, you're still on mute there. If you can unmute, Tom. Oh, click one more time there. Tom, you're still on mute. There we go.
All right, finally got it. So first, the adage that talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not, is very true, and that's the first learning we got from running that program, right? So we work with a lot of talent in a lot of cities, and a lot of underrepresented entrepreneurs that we work with, and some of the cities included New Orleans, Detroit, Miami, Oakland, and in working with those entrepreneurs who are simply just looking for an opportunity on how to get into to tap into the innovation economy and build their companies and take their ideas to product and take them to market. And that's what they were looking for. And basically what we did was create the Rising Stars program from Techstars. Thanks to David Cohen and the folks at Techstars for allowing me to do that. And so when you look at the results of that, though, is that it confirms my initial statement, right? That I think we have north of $200 million in terms of our valuation of the companies that we started off with, right? So these are people who started with nothing, did zero, right? But they were able to build companies that I think right now, if we subtract some big ones, right, like Squire, which I think is probably $1 billion company right now, but if we subtract those big ones, the rest are to 200, north of $100 million in terms of combined valuation for the companies that we started with. So that's just company valuation, but a lot of things have happened. Some companies got acquired, and so those had meaningful exits for the people who started those companies and the jobs that they created, right? Some acquired each other, and some is very importantly, right? They figured out, hey, my company is not going to work, but they gained enough experience to earn jobs at companies like Facebook and other top tech companies in very meaningful ways for someone who started with zero, right? And so that's the whole notion of talent and opportunity is what we learned there. In terms of what we need to do here in Colorado, I think to enable things like this, we need to enable a lot more collisions, right? And creating spaces like I know in Denver we have Commons on Champa, right? These are just spaces where someone who is looking for an opportunity has an opportunity to collide with someone who may be able to provide them an opportunity or a gateway to some benefit within the ecosystem, right? And so that's one thing that I think we got to do just as a state, create more and more of those places. I know in Europe, I've been reading that they are investing in co-working spaces at municipal and governmental level. I think what Denver has done with Commons in Champa has been great. I've personally met a lot of young people there who are looking for an opportunity. And then lastly, right, I would like to just say that there's a lot of talent out there. The job is not done. The numbers still are not great in terms of how many underrepresented or underestimated people are finding opportunities. To me, it comes down to this, right? It's just bad business as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as a company. If you're not maximizing the resources and talent that's available to you, that is just not good business at all. So I encourage you to look at it from that lens, that, hey, look, man, I got a lot of resources and talent available. I should maximize it as an entrepreneur or as a founder. Or as an existing company. I think it's really good. It's win-win for everybody. And if you don't know where to start, hey, contact me. I'll get you. There are a lot of companies that are really trying to get pipelines really enriching, and companies really looking to connect people who are looking for opportunities with the opportunities that are available. So the job is not done. We have work to do. You can contribute.
Yeah, I love the term there of kind of creating spaces for talent collision. I'm gonna take that one with me. That's great. Maybe to the rest of you, Patrick, and I mean, again, I think we've all hit on this, that the talent environment is incredibly competitive. Here, outside of here, as we look to kind of have more of a remote workforce in some cases, some of those themes that came across in Greg's conversation, how have you adjusted your approach to attracting top talent to ensure you have a competitive advantage in this market, I guess, through your people?
I think one of the things I've done, and it actually started at Kapost, was we lifted the idea of tour of duty from Reid Hoffman's book, The Alliance, and we live that now. Like everybody in my revenue organization, marketing, sales, customer success, has a tour of duty. Like, where are you now and where are you trying to go? And if you don't have that, that's on your, like, from my perspective, it's on your manager and they're on my list, right? Like, you've got to take that seriously. Because one, developing talent is always kind of in my mind, a less expensive way to build the right ethos and build the right thing. But it also demonstrates that within your organization, you're going to provide opportunity for people who stand up and do things. And so that's one of the things that I've kind of done or absorbed that I think is just, it's easy and simple, but hard to make sure you keep it in place. But if you take it seriously, it pays a lot of dividends. And for those who don't know, the idea is basically you've got a job today, but where are you building to? What do you want to be when you grow up? And you don't have to know that, but you should have a directional idea. And then because you're in a startup environment, you're always resource starved. What are the opportunities your manager can look for to give you as kind of volunteer extra homework that help you build in that direction? And I think that in my mind needs to be part of what you do to cultivate your team at this point.
Yeah, I love that. It's not just about attracting, but developing, right? So Anna, take it away.
Lauren, you and I both hit on the same thing. I think the risk in my experience in a couple of the different startups I have been a part of has been not getting to developing talent quickly enough, being too focused on solving today's business problem and really not creating pathways so people can see how they stay on the bus longer with your organization. And I think Tour of Duty actually was an incredible experience at Kapost and one that I took forward. I think we're all seeing it. There's chatter about the idea of gigs inside of your organization, of looking for help and then finding other motivated people inside of the organization to come in, whether it's for a couple months, whether it's for a longer stint. So really leaning in as a startup, not waiting to get to the point where you're actively talking about how do you career path people, how do you develop the ways in which you have folks grow themselves, and also give them the tools to advocate. If you have an economy inside of your own organization of these are the things I need help with, and these are the ways I can go and look for the places I get to grow, you take a lot of that onus and you give people the tools to self-advocate their own career paths, which I think is hugely valuable, especially in startups when we're all sometimes moving too quickly to slow down and think about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think this theme of startup and culture is such a critical one. I think it can be also a critical competitive differentiator when you go to hire talent. But let's talk a little bit about startup culture and kind of it being attractive. I think we talked earlier just about Colorado and the outdoors and the mountains, but really diving into culture and startup culture. What does that mean to you? How do you use it to differentiate in this competitive talent market? And Anna, maybe I'll go back to you there since it was a great segue. You've had experience building this startup culture, in the early days at Rally, at Kapost, as you just shared. You're now doing, culture building at Workday. What do you think are the key elements to building culture, and kind of what ultimately wins in both big and small organizations, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's funny because it doesn't really significantly change when I sat down and thought about it. And as you mentioned, like my current life is a much larger organization, similar challenges. And so it's one of those things wherever it's called, but I think most of us think about it as kind of like, how do you foster a learning culture? And what does that mean? Because that can mean so many different things. And I've seen it be highly technically focused about how do we build the right skill set so that I have fungibility in my teams, so that my engineers can kind of do whatever I need them to do. And that is like just scraping the bottom of the barrel of what really good culture can have if you truly lean into how to do learning culture. So for me, it's a reflection of what are the different areas, whether they're soft skills, whether they're how do you have a hard critical conversation with a coworker? How do you facilitate training that? How is that something that you bring to everybody in your organization, not just as a one-off? We have some people who are good at these hard things, but more, it's just a muscle. So going into organizations and assessing what are the muscles that we need to train, and then how do we make it more available? How do we have those in our organization, maybe who are more senior, dip down into the individual contributor layer and make themselves available? I think one of the most powerful experiences I had was taking what could be termed maybe a master's level class from our CFO at Rally. And courses right now are around like, how do you have a influencing conversation when you're not directly in the line of managers? So how do you kind of take and stretch influence from one area to another? And I think that really means sitting down and thinking through what are the right training courses? How do you provide them? How do you make them available? And how do you normalize that as a cultural shift? And for me, a huge piece of that is having your actual leadership lean down and participate, whether they're ones providing training or whether they're in a room having an uncomfortable learning experience with other members of the team. I think that's the component that really matters to me, is having everybody participate, not have it be isolated just to say more of your junior level people in an organization.
That's great. So that the top-down learning culture certainly is critical, and especially I would assume in companies where resources are stretched. Tom, maybe a little bit of a different aspect of culture, but wanted to hear a little bit about your current focus, at Gravity House. And again, as I understand it, it's a uniquely Colorado organization focused on kind of mountain living and experiences, and was curious how that mission has ultimately translated into building the culture of the organization.
Yeah, so Gravity House at the in simple terms is a social club for the modern adventurer. So that makes us a post child for Colorado lifestyle mountain living, right? But when it comes to culture, right? So this is a super interesting question. We started off when we started this company with a mission statement, and then we broke it down in a question format mission statement, right? So that we are always able to ask ourselves whether we are aligning with the mission, and it's three simple questions, right? Is it good for you? Is it good for the environment? And is it an incredible experience? So those are the three questions that we apply to everything that we do. And what we did, the next thing after that was literally to strip down in industry, the hospitality industry, into to its bare studs, started from fresh principles, and then we rebuilt our business model and our culture based on the things that we learned from the tech startup, from the accelerators, and from past businesses that we had. And so what that has done for us is to build an organization that incredibly aligns with the mission first. And I should say that it's a little bit easier for us being in Colorado, in that the mission aligns with the lifestyle, which aligns with how people live. So our employees do live the lifestyle, and we enable that via some of the things that we have taken from our work in previous startups, which is personal OKRs. So we just don't have business OKRs, right? So we have personal OKRs, and those are super aligned with our mission statement. We have a lot of, because our customer and our customer persona and our employee really do intersect a whole lot, I think, with the exception of just one persona, right? So what we're able to do is to create events and experiences where our customers and our employees can both take part, right? And what that has done for us as a company is to build this organization that's super in tune with what the customer wants, what the customer needs. That's not to say that customers are not going to complain; they'll complain. But what they're guaranteed is that there's going to be somebody from the company who's going to listen, who is right there. So that's on the culture side, from nurturing a culture. That's what we did, and then we also believe really in investing in our in the people who work at Gravity House, right? So when I say we stripped down the whole idea to the studs, and we started the whole hospitality industry from first principles. So some of the things that we brought in addition to personal OKRs, right? It's a lot of the things that we learned in Agile, right? A lot of those concepts. So if you hear our chef or our front desk manager at one of our hotels talk about an Agile stand-up, and one metric that matters, right? Like all the things that we learned that we thought were really valuable in growing startups and creating for a great environment, where after somebody leaves Gravity House, if they ever leave Gravity House, they'll feel like, hey, you know what? This is enriching my professional career. right? And this has made me a better person. And so that's what we do in really bringing a lot of new education, new insights, and to our whole employee base, regardless, not just executives, not just corporate, but also all the way down to the line cook. They're on the stand-up meeting. They know what a lot of those acronyms mean that most of the people in high growth tech companies use.
Yeah, that agile business concept. I see Anna smiling too. It's bringing me back to my rally days. And I also heard just that customer focus. I mean, it's something I think even at Google we talk a lot about, but kind of living the life that your customer lives, or kind of coaching them on your culture before even trying to sell them a product or an experience in this case. So that's great. Greg, Patrick, what other aspects of culture are important to your teams and your organizations, and kind of ensuring a high performance connected workforce?
One word or phrase was not mentioned yet, and remote operation. I think, we are now looking forward to a new way of doing work, which doesn't include the proverbial ping pong table anymore. So the creativeness of maintaining connections and trust between employees, which used to be about, going out for happy hours with each other and you sort of laugh together, now needs to transcend, interviews that take place where they're not in your office to, the day-to-day activities. So a culture that thrives, and I think no one's got this code cracked yet because we're all really deeply experiencing this due to the pandemic's forcing function. The investment right now, more than ever, in not your granddaddy's HR team, but true people leaders, true L&D leaders, folks that can commit to creating programmatically the ways to ensure trust and fun between the employees is sort of understood and enacted. I mean, everything from, the appropriate, have beer on your hangout, be good with that. Go on a wild goose chase, like a treasure hunt that, you got people in San Francisco doing the same thing at the same time as people in Denver, have fun, inject that, because if you don't, we all will suffer from Zoomitis, and you're just going to work and grind yourself, and your connections will degrade. And why are you doing it? So that's one sort of thing that I would probably say we are really, really, really investing in at Jump Cloud.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'd love to hear from others too. If you have great ideas that we can share with our audience on connecting folks remotely, I think it's a big challenge. I get the Zoomitis for sure. Patrick, looks like you're ready to say something.
Yeah, I think online games, that's been a fun experiment, like getting people to draw out social circles that are more around things that people are passionate outside. I'm going to jump to the other side of the coin for a minute though, but I also think, leave it to the revenue leader. Accountability is important too. Because if you do have somebody in that environment who isn't pulling their weight, your A players know it, and they know it very quickly. And so if you're not willing to kind of, do what you need to do to make sure that behavior changes or remove that, then I think it suffers too. So I think it's work hard, play hard.
Well, great point. Let's shift gears a little bit. When I think about kind of building a world-class organization, and, I have a perspective now being at Google and kind of being at small companies and startups in the Boulder market prior. But one of the things I think about is being a startup is that you don't kind of have that natural brand recognition of the giants like Google, Salesforce, et cetera. But you still have this incredible need to get visibility beyond Colorado, for your business. I would love to hear, what you do to get visibility on the global stage. And maybe, Greg, I'll start with you. At Jump Cloud, as I understand it, you've been incredibly focused on a product-led go-to-market motion. How has that helped or hurt you in getting visibility on the global stage?
So I would suspect we have given this is Denver Startup Week, you have a ton of entrepreneurs who are figuring out, what the product market fit is for their constituency. And here's, Lauren, what I would say. The day and the age of the the companies that have the time or even the capital to experiment and fall into their product market fit, and suddenly they're the next Instagram. If you're focusing on the consumer world, you're seeing a lot more filtration and a lot more scruples, like investors really trying to study what are you attempting to do, Miss or Mr. Entrepreneur. So let me with that as sort of a backdrop, let me kind of put it this way. There's a reason why the internet exists, and it's not just for Facebook. Sorry, Facebook, even though you're down today. It's to create connectedness and large exposure to great ideas. In our journey, we had a premeditation on our success being tightly tied to this concept of product-led growth. So what is that? Really what that means is let the internet do the work of large-scale selling for you. So we knew we wouldn't have the capital or the time in terms of, just time to get to market and to create a thriving company if we needed to push our agenda into the world. We needed to attract people and pull them into our mission, because they never would have heard us. This little tiny company in a town where no one believed software could be written, Boulder. And so what did we do? We in effect, somebody's got some feedback, I think. We in effect created a model where we've never made an outbound sales call to sell Jump Cloud. So in 8 years, haven't picked up the phone, and we've never made an outbound sales call. We've let the internet bring them to us in the tune of now at the stage of our company, about 102,000 active organizations. So we used strong tactics on demand generation, in our case, content, invested early in just writing blogs. And at this point, we have 5,600 SEO-tuned blog posts that just capture what we know predictively people are going to ask about our market. And we rank on page 1 of Google to do that. Now we're watching the inverse happen, people typing the word Jump Cloud into their search engines because the brand has gotten out there. But we could not have paid for that early on. We would have suffered the consequence of burning out too quickly. So that was the premeditation. That was where product-led growth created a operationally efficient engine like I've never been a part of before.
That's great. So it's, it's not just product, but also the content strategy surrounding what was building a great product. Very familiar with that strategy from my time and Anna's time and Patrick's time at Kapost as well. I think it, worked well for them in the early days, for sure. Patrick, I'll shift gears to you because kind of opposite from what I heard Greg just share, time at Jive, and I was part of that sales team there that you were leading. They took a very different approach, right, to kind of building their organization. I would say a very traditional kind of enterprise approach to international expansion. And, being a few years removed from that experience now, would love to hear if you would do things differently.
Yeah, I mean, being a few years removed, I look back and said, wow, that was really, really hard. And the way we did international expansion at Jive was traditional. We found a leader in the European market that we all believed in, and then that gentleman was tasked with growing a team. And so, me being more channel focused, he kind of built his organization in that direction, but it was incredibly expensive. And in all honesty, it wasn't that different than what we did at Akamai, where the amount of capital it took to start a business was crazy, because we had to build those organizations. We had to deploy servers, things like that. Flash forward and look at Kapost, and Kapost was all about drawing people to you, right? Like we didn't have that product-led model dialed yet, like Jump Cloud does. It was a few years prior, but it was really about writing content, marketing content that was truly interesting to the end user, to that audience, to the person for whom you're trying to solve a problem. And people would take our stuff with them. Like they would download a white paper and be like, I'm taking this to my next company because this is how you do it. And so that ability, that gave us, we would go to conferences in San Francisco, New York, and people would be like, oh, Compost, I know who you guys are. And we would be like, yes, this is working. This is great. But I do think as the market moves, there is that progression, right? Like the idea of putting or standing up a much more traditional enterprise sales team. Like if you look at like the validations in the market, like SendGrid never did that, right? Like they were very developer focused in their approach. You can look at what JumpCloud's doing. You can look at, even Twilio to some example, although I would say they're a little more on the enterprise side. But that motion, I kind of joke with my team now that to think about the idea of putting outside reps in their basements with an SE walking around New York City, I'm like, do I need that? I don't think I need that, because if I look at my cost of goods sold, they're going to be much higher than, say, somebody else. Like there was a great blog post by Cameron Deach, another Jive guy who's now CRO at Atlassian, where he literally rolled out his data and he was like, look, this is what we can spend on R&D because we're not spending it on sales.
So you're saying it's good I moved into recruiting, huh? So just to, Anna, maybe Tom, all of you, one of the things that I hadn't heard mentioned yet specifically was also about partnerships and how partnerships can potentially help a startup scale and certainly kind of get visibility on the global stage. So would love to hear from either of you on kind of partnerships as part of the approach, or just more broadly on kind of go-to-market approach in terms of scaling.
Yeah. Sorry, Tom,
Go ahead.
I was going to say that when both Patrick and Greg were just talking over and over in my mind, I was saying, well, yeah, or you do partners. And I think a lot of times, or at least in the experiences I've had in startups, partner strategy is kind of a joke for a really long time in the startup life. It's a really fine and interesting discipline, and you have to find somebody who gets partner ecosystem, and especially in your industry, to really be able to move that needle. But if you move the needle, international expansion especially becomes something that you can use as a growth accelerator. And I think it's partially not just assuming you can kind of figure that strategy out and really going out and looking for a deep knowledge and understanding and leveraging that. So whatever the product industry is, I think it's different no matter which one of these we're talking about. We're all over the place in terms of what industries we have experience in. But I think that does seriously move the growth needle. And usually doesn't come early enough in my experience. So I think more organizations need to lean in, not only to Greg's point on having the market come to them, but also going and finding the market through way less expensive efforts, such as partners. Over to you, Tom.
Oh yeah, I was gonna just take the flip coin with this, because I used to be in these as part of the audience, and when people talked about global, I kind of switched off because I was like, I'm way too small. Yeah, but so here's what I would like to say though. I was part of the Boulder ecosystem as way back as like 2006, 2007, when everything was just starting to come on itself. What was important is that global starts at home, right? That's one of the things that I learned. Because at that point, if you look at 2007, 2008, we were all made it a point. I'm not sure if we made it a point, but or whether those were just all options, but to use each other's products, right? So if you look at my portfolio as a CTO, I use Rally, I use SendGrid, I used all the different startups that were in Boulder that had something that I could use. I used those, and what that did for them was, one, it validated them, and two, it gives them a customer base to which to a little bit of leverage with partners, especially when you're small, right? And so if we are looking at growing in Colorado, I think it's a pretty good model that, hey, let's take other people who are working on startups, let's take them seriously. Let's look at their products. If it's a good product, if you can edit your portfolio, or if you can just try it, right? That's really, really key, especially for somebody who is trying to get their company off the ground. And that's how we start. If you're sitting in the audience and say, hey, well, global is not relevant to me, that's how we start. And if you can convince, because it's also a sales job, right? You got to convince all the people who are in your state, in your city, to use your product. And if you get good buy-in there, then you go to the next state, you go national, then you can go global. But you got to start somewhere.
I love it, Tom. You're just serving up these great transitions to my next topic. I love this concept of connections to kind of the broader Denver Boulder startup community. I think as we've heard from all of you, to create world-class organizations here in Colorado, we're often bringing together leaders and teams from different places, from different backgrounds and experiences. At some point in all of your careers, my career as well, you've all been new to Colorado, which can be an isolating experience. So I was hoping to hear from you on where you found community and resources to help support your entrepreneurial journeys. Kind of what resources were out there, maybe to help raise the bar in your functional areas or your parts of the organization. Any of you can start. Patrick, why don't I start with you?
I think the first thing I think of is something Greg actually reminded me of when he was chatting. It felt to me like there was definitely an ethos in the broader Front Range community of anybody would take your meeting. I remember just reaching out to people who I had no real knowledge of and being like, hey, I'm new to town. I would love to talk to you. Will you do that? And, that was super helpful for me when I first got here. And so I kind of made a mental note to be like, hey, if anybody ever asked me to meet, I'm in, I'll do it. It's how you pay it forward. So I think that was a big piece for me when I first got here. And then I remember just the scrappiness. I remember there was bar camp. I remember there was startup weekend with VoSnap, which was like a text voting application. And then there was the infamous Boulder Denver New Tech meetup at CU. I would go to those fairly regularly until somebody once told me that 95% of the audience only went once. And there was always the question of, wait, how are you going to make money with that? So I think early it was scrappier. But now when I think about resources, it's really, it's the things you would expect. There are LinkedIn groups, there are folks, you can see the kind of community within LinkedIn. And then, I still find that ethos of local folks being willing to meet with anyone exists. And so that I find super helpful because I'll just reach out and say, hey, you're in a company that's similar size and stage. You might be working on some of the same challenges. Can we talk? And I find that super valuable.
That's great. Anna, what's kind of your perspective, or what resources have you leaned into or found in this startup world?
I feel like there's an incredible willingness to network for each other. I think that as I tapped into the startup world, it has paid out in an abundance of other opportunities, both personally and professionally. And so I think, to Patrick's point, the willingness for anybody to take a meeting with you, I think I've experienced personally here. When I first got to this area, I think it was a beer with an HR rep from one company led to a meeting with a rally person at another. And, the story goes from there. So it's, never look a gift horse in the mouth. All of your connections as you enter this community eventually can lead to some really interesting opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. Love the network thread here. Tom, what about yourself?
Yeah, I moved to Colorado in '95, and back then there was just a tech center, right? And so that's where all the networking was happening, down in the tech center. And until I discovered Boulder and what was happening in Boulder, and what I noticed in Boulder, which is kind of what's now happening, at least across the whole Front Range, was exactly what Patrick is mentioning. Was there was a lot of scrappiness. There was willingness to share, which is really, really big, right? Like this collective knowledge of we as a group are gonna learn about this new thing that Amazon has just announced called AWS, and we're gonna be good at it, right? Like literally we would meet and share knowledge on things like that in ways that I think we started to see like 2-3 years later when companies like GNIP and Filterbox getting acquired and starting to realize like, oh my goodness, we build so much value in these sessions we used to have at Trident, at the Cup, at different places, right? So this networking, communitying, super important. But I think also important is being able to have a list of mentors and coaches, people you're always using for to sound out ideas, because a lot of times we get like you just have our heads down on what you're working on, and when you come up for air, somebody comes in and gives you a different perspective on things. So that's super important. One thing that also I would like to push, because I always like pushing this, is just our colleges, right? I got my first job from an internship because I got recruited out of that, right? And I ended up going to colleges and recruiting on behalf of the corporate companies I was working for. So being able to engage with these colleges, we have colleges with so much talent here across the front range and across the state that they offer, especially if you're in college and you are a person who a person who's starting up right now, and you're looking for talent or you're looking to network to get talent. Don't forget the colleges. They're doing a really good job, especially I know I speak on behalf of tech, and I know colleges like the School of Mines, CU, CSU, great talent up and down the front range. So yeah.
That's a great point. It's Google hasn't done a great job locally, but obviously, globally, Google has a very formal internship program that's been very successful. But I saw Rally do a really great job of this. Obviously being a small company locally, they had an internship program. Knew a couple people that went through that. Actually, 2 of whom are now at Google, but were interns at Rally when I was at Rally. So one of them I mentored. So it's kind of a cool progression. I think it's a great area that a lot of startups don't feel like they have the resources to go and tackle, but there's so much missed opportunity there. Greg, anything that you would add to kind of close us out in terms of the resources and kind of bringing these folks together?
Yeah, I think I know I'm preventing a lot of people from going to have beers, I'm sure. I'd say this, my journey here in Colorado has been a beautiful one in terms of just witnessing the transgression and the progression that we have. When I, first moved here, I was working for a Bay Area company, and I did this thing called remote work, which, largely was not a thing back then. And I actually said to my wife, I'm like, I think we moved to a retirement home. Like, I don't know if real stuff gets done here, And within, a few months, I was introduced. I actually met this guy, sort of long hair, about my size, pretty tall, going through the metal detector at SFO. And he had the sticker on his laptop. And it was, I think, are you from Boulder? It was the Foundry Group sticker. And it was a guy by the name of Brad Feld. So this is like 2004, probably. He was still with Mobius. Techstars didn't exist. Foundry Group didn't exist yet. It would soon come into existence. And that changed my life. But what I witnessed was a sea of people, especially in Boulder, who were high intentioned, would take meetings, would mentor, but largely, in Foundry was excellent at teaching the pro entrepreneur side of the table. They protected many entrepreneurs and their investments. But what we lacked 10, 15 years ago were executors, operators, the people that actually got it done in mass. And now we're finding, 10, 15 years later, Colorado isn't a bad place to live. So from, a hiring perspective, I can chuck a baseball and hit 5 entrepreneurs here, right? People that have been successful, unsuccessful, people willing to take chances. But the big motion that I'm seeing now, based upon an influx of talent, are those that are still in their career trajectory. And those are the ones you want to tap into. Those are the ones you want to teach, and initially start by teaching them how to spell the word entrepreneur. Teach them what it really means, which is about taking chances, but helping and providing support. Like, this is the true meaning and the spirit of the ethos of doing that. So again, starting with us here in town as experienced folks that have built things, maybe failed, maybe succeeded, but now filling our masses with phenomenal people to help us execute. this is how we've changed, I think, remarkably.
It's a great way to close us out. And I know we only have a couple minutes left, but certainly to any of the attendees on the line, wanted to offer the opportunity to ask questions of the panel. You know, I'm looking at the chat here. You're welcome to use the chat function if that's easiest, and happy to facilitate any questions anyone might have.
And while we wait, can we appreciate our signers? Like, seriously, incredible.
Thank you. And there's also a Q&A function. Either one works for me. We'll give it a minute here and see if anybody is typing. Yes, another appreciative remark for the signers. Great job. Not seeing any questions at the moment come in. Panel, any questions for one another? Something that somebody mentioned that was super interesting that you'd love to ask one more question on?
I think Keller's question around, you know, are we in the way of people getting to beer is probably a good question.
I was just going to say, it sounds like it's time for a beer. So we appreciate all the attendees, the signers, and panel. Really, thank you for taking the time this evening. And yes, go grab a beer. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.